As we headed into the stairwell, a volley of PPB bursts almost nailed us. The air smelled of smoke, and I saw scorch marks along the bulkheads as we dropped to the floor and Urch returned fire. "Give us the human, Urch," one of them said as he peeked around the corner. I recognized his deep voice at once. It was Nutjob. "Your species is primitive too, but you are part of the Confederation, so we're willing to let you prove yourself, as others from your savage world have. You can do that by aiding our cause and handing over the corruptor." "What exactly am I corrupting?" I called out.
"A lively exchange of ideas can wait for another time,"
Urch said, firing off a few blasts. The mutineers returned fire, lighting up the corridor with sparks. The smell of burning plastic was heavy in the air. "This doesn't have to concern you, Urch," Nutjob called.
"Weapons fire in my direction makes it concern me," he said. "And I'm not about to turn anyone over to your Fadic masters."
"You think we are traitors?" Nutjob asked incredulously. "You couldn't be more wrong. We're working with those who think the Confederation has gone the wrong way. The movement for peace isn't about cooperating with fads."
"Doesn't seem to be about peace either,"
Urch observed. "Not when it comes to our enemies. I'm sorry, but we can't let those humans make it to Confederation Central. Hand them over. We'll return them to their own planet, and this disgraceful business will be concluded." I didn't believe that for a second, and apparently neither did Urch, because he fired off another couple of blasts and charged forward, practically throwing himself down the stairs. He let loose another barrage of PPB blasts and shouted for me to come join him.
"I got 2 of them,"
he said, gesturing towards the unconscious bodies on the floor.
"Nutjob got away."
Urch and I rushed the last couple of 100 feet or so and burst into the shuttle bay. The chamber space glowed blue from plasma fields that protected us from the vacuum of space. The colonel was standing with a PPB pistol drawn, aimed at the door. When he recognized us, his expression relaxed.
"The others?"
Urch asked.
"Not here yet," the colonel said.
Urch looked at me.
"There are 2 priorities. You must prep the shuttle to be ready to move the second that all are on board. You must also secure the entrance. I will have to go search for the director and the captain."
He gestured towards one of the shuttles, and we got on board. Urch opened the weapons locker and handed everyone pistols. I took mine and felt reassured for a second, but then a horrible thought occurred to me. "Oh no," I said. "Alice, she's in the brig."
"Sweet-smelling flower," Urch swore. "That's a problem."
"It's not far," I said. "I'll get her out." "I'll go with him," the colonel said, while he looked down the sight of his PPB pistol. "You never forget your first ray gun." Urch nodded and turned to Charles and me son.
"You must protect the shuttle to keep the enemy at bay."
Charles had a PPB pistol in each hand. "No problem."
"You'll need the access codes for both the brig and the shuttle,"
Urch said, keying his bracelet to send the information to me.
"I'm transmitting them now. Good luck."
My bracelet chimed, indicating that it had received the information, and the colonel and I ran down the hall, which still smelled faintly of smoke from all the pistol discharge. The brig was on this deck, but almost on the opposite end of the ship, which meant we'd have to be pretty lucky getting there and back without running into trouble. We were not lucky, and we almost stumbled into a trio of mutineers, but the colonel took them down without breaking his stride, and we burst into the brig. A big alien who looked like a gigantic, muscle-bound poodle stood guard, and the colonel shot him as soon as he saw the Movement for Peace armband. I ran over to the security console and punched into the code. The plasma field dropped, and the door swung open. Alice stepped out, looking sleepy and confused. "What's going on?" "Mutineers have taken the ship," I explained. "They say they want to take us back to Earth, but I think they really want to put us out the airlock." Alice stared at me. Her eyes were huge, and the fear was unmistakable. I knew that, in that moment, she regretted stowing away. Then she stood straight, holding herself like she was ready for anything. I noticed she had a data bracelet on her wrist, so I knew she wouldn't be at too much of a disadvantage. "We're escaping," I told her, trying to act calm, like this was the sort of thing I did all the time. Maybe it was. I keyed my data bracelet so I could speak to my entire group. "I've got Alice. Does anyone need our help?"
"Negative,"
Urch's voice came over the comm.
I've made contact with the captain and his group. All are accounted for, but we have to take a circuitous route. We'll be there in 5 minutes.
Understood. The colonel led us back to the shuttle bay, and we encountered no more resistance. I directed Alice to the shuttle and stood outside with the colonel watching the door. As it opened, I was hoping Urch had made it back sooner than I'd expected, and we'd be able to get out of here. But I was disappointed. 6 mutineers, Nutjob among them, poured in, PPBs blazing. We hit the deck and returned fire, but their shots had been way off. They weren't aiming for us. I think the colonel figured it out the same time I did.
Get in the shuttle, he yelled. Now!
I scrambled up and threw myself inside while I shouted for anyone, to seal the doors. The second we crossed the threshold, Me-Sun mashed some buttons and the shuttle doors hissed closed. And then my head cracked against one of the bulkheads. Not the bulkheads, I realized, the ceiling. And then the bulkhead, and then the floor, and then Me-Sun's foot. Through the burst of pain and the nauseating tumbling, I managed to catch a glimpse of the view screen and saw the kind disposition from the outside. Nutjob and his fellow mutineers had shot out the plasma field generator in the hopes of blowing us into space. Instead, they'd blown our shuttle out of the bay. I clawed my way over to the shuttle's control station. It took me a moment to remember what I was doing, but I began pressing in codes and the shuttle stopped tumbling. I immediately keyed my bracelet. Urch.
We're coming,
he said irritably. Don't, I said. They blew out the plasma fields. The bay's been compromised, and the shuttle's no longer on board.
Understood,
came Urch's voice. He was speaking in a clipped tone that he must have learned from his years in training, but I had no doubt he was in serious trouble.
We're going to have to lie low until I can come up with a way for us to rendezvous. I've got some ideas, so stand by.
Good luck. I was racked with worry about them, but I was also worried about us. We were sitting ducks out here. If they really wanted us dead and they were willing to sacrifice the shuttle, killing us would be no problem. Alternatively, they could secure us with a lance and take their sweet time deciding what they wanted to do with us. The only way we would be safe would be if we ran away, but that would mean abandoning Urch and Nyana, not to mention the captain and the director.
Running away is the best option, Smelly said. Preserve yourself. You shall make other friends soon enough.
Not going to happen, I mumbled. We need to figure out a way to hide ourselves from the ship until we can get them out of here. Charles nodded, looking like he was concentrating.
Is there some way we could hide the shuttle in the ship's ion trail without the exhaust destroying us?
Brilliant, I shouted. Even if they guess we're hiding back there, we'll be blending into the exhaust emission. They won't be able to get a fix on us. We can hide in plain sight. I tapped my data bracelet and began calling up data. Smelly made a disembodied sighing noise.
I suppose if you are determined to stick near the other worthless members of your primitive social group, I may as well keep you alive.
Numbers began to appear before my eyes, hovering in the air. I realized Smelly was projecting a course. I didn't hesitate. Smelly was about a zillion times smarter than I was, and he was too worried about its well-being to give me bad advice. I had the new course laid in, and we were moving into position when Charles gasped at the information on his readout.
They're beginning the sequence to open their dark matter missile bays. They're going to fire on us.
Before he'd even finished speaking, I banked us sharply away from the nearest launch bay. I knew from both sim training and real-life experience how hard it was to get a dark matter missile lock, and I planned to make their hitting us as difficult as possible. I could evade them all day, I told myself, or at least until they ran out of missiles. They could always move on to PPB weapons, I realized, and the shuttle wouldn't have much defense against that, which made me sort of wonder why they would squander a missile when they didn't need to.
Don't bother with evasion,
Charles said, his voice strangely flat. He was scrolling through text on his bracelet. Clearly, he'd been wondering the same thing I had, and he'd entered the query into his bracelet's database.
I think they're using a missile because it can lock on to our shuttle's unique comm signal. They don't even have to aim. The missile will just find us.
Change the comm signal, then, Colonel Rage ordered.
There's not enough time, Charles said. According to this, it can't be done in less than 3 minutes, and once they fire the missile, we'll have about 30 seconds.
Options, barked the Colonel. He stood with his hands on his hips, his expression one of impatience. He didn't look like a man who'd just been told he had 30 seconds to live. He looked like someone who expected his subordinates to snap to.
You must surrender, Smelly said. There is no technological solution in the time available.
We have to surrender, I said, hating how much hating how the words sounded. I'd faced enemies before, but I'd never given in. Not willingly. Now the clock was running out, and it was either give up or blow up. I looked back at Charles and me son, both of them battered and terrified. I didn't hesitate. I told myself that this wasn't giving in. This was providing myself with more time to figure out how to turn things around. I hit my data bracelet. Kind disposition. Hold your fire. We surrender. Repeat, we surrender.
That's nice,
came Nutjob's voice.
But our orders are to kill you.
There was a flash of light as the ship's missile bay doors opened and our enemies prepared to fire on us.
We're going to die,
Misan said. Her voice was hollow as the realization came over her. There was no escape, no hope of evasion. They were locked on, and that missile was going to hit us and scatter our atoms into the void of space.
Will it hurt?
Charles asked. His voice cracked, but he met my eye, not wanting to go out a coward. It's going to hurt them, I said, and hurled the ship forward at maximum acceleration. I may have only had a few seconds left, but I wasn't going to sit here and wait for the end. If there was a way out of this, I was going to find it, or go out trying. With the shuttle moving at its top velocity, I spun it around to the other side of the kind disposition, giving us another few seconds. Everyone was thrown to the side, and the internal gravity systems tried to compensate for the speed and sharp turns.
There's no point, Charles said. We're done.
Can they cancel the missile? I asked, but the glazed look in Charles' eyes said he wasn't really listening. Snap out of it! Can they disarm or negate the con lock? His eyes widened slightly as he began to understand what I had in mind. He immediately ran a query through his data bracelet.
Yes, if they choose, he said.
Then let's make that their best option. I'll keep us in one piece as long as I can. Charles grinned, suddenly reinvigorated.
A fine gambit,
he shouted. Then, while trying not to smash into the side of the ship, of the sharply turning shuttle, he keyed his data bracelet.
Kind disposition. Cancel your missile lock, or we're going to take you with us.
I was now circling the ship at top speed, and the missile was following us about 500 feet aft. I kept us perhaps 20 feet out from the ship's hull, so if the missile hit us, the kind disposition would take the hit as well. There was no answer. Charles signaled them again.
Kind disposition. I strongly urge you to abort the missile.
This time we got an answer.
We're trying,
came a panicked voice.
We can't figure out how.
Don't you morons train your personnel? Colonel Rage demanded.
We didn't complete training,
came the panicked reply.
What do we do?
Unfortunately, their incompetence came as no surprise. The crew had been forced on the captain by Junip. Clearly, they were assassins meant to take the humans out. And unless I missed my guess, Director Glee-Wixix at the same time. Junip's loyal soldiers were supposed to relieve him of two pesky problems at once. They weren't prepared to deal with complicated and high-stress technical operations.
Fleshy abominations never cease to amaze me with their stupidity, Smelly said. Tell the dimwit that in order to override a comlock, he needs to access the tertiary command subroutine.
I passed Smelly's advice along, minus the insults.
Give us a minute,
the being on the other end shouted.
I've got the ion trail coordinates locked in, Charles said. The second they cancel the lock, we're going to vanish from their sensors.
It's not over yet, I muttered. I checked the distance on the missile. It was almost 600 feet away. That's good, I thought as I looped around the ship. We're gaining. We're going to beat them. It took almost all of my concentration to hug the ship without crashing into it, but another 20 seconds, I looked back to see where the missile was, and it was nowhere. Missile's gone, I said.
It can't have vanished,
Charles told me. Then there was a bright light, and once more the shuttle was spinning wildly as we were tossed against the walls and pinned by the force of the propulsion. We were being hurled away by the blast wave. Pain and nausea and panic all jostled for my brain's attention, and the light of the ship exploding burned my eyes from the view screen. The missile had struck while trying to circle the ship and lock onto us. The kind disposition had been destroyed.